And welcome back to the Eagle Insight podcast, where we help leaders master their craft and live better lives. And today I am absolutely pleased to have a good friend, Mark Hoffmeister, here. Mark is a warrior. He's a scholar and he's a performance coach, and just probably the most resilient person that I know, who's overcome adversity but takes every hard thing he ever did and puts it into his strengths, and has just a remarkable way of communicating with people. Mark, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Bob. I am thrilled to be here. Really appreciate the opportunity. Looking forward to chatting with you.
Yeah, so just talking with you about all of the different things that you have done since you and I served together a long time ago. We had very different paths in the service, and we've had different paths since the service, but we've always kind of had the same passion for helping other people. And now I see how you are helping people within your community with your performance coaching, and I think you're an advocate for fitness in a way that most people are not, uh, and kind of the deep passion that you bring to every single thing you do. I'm pleased to call you a friend.
Thanks, Bob. Well, hopefully I can infect a little of that on you and on your audience. I think that what I've had the privilege to do since leaving the service is take my passions and turn them into a profession, and to really help grow people. And that's what I love.
Yeah, but your passions have been, I think, very action oriented for most of your life. You've done endurance racing, martial arts. You're so into biking and skiing that you now have a bike shop and a ski shop right there in your garage. Tell us about how did that happen?
Step at a time. All all my life I've been involved in different types of sports, and my wife has kind of shared in that journey. And we had a pretty interesting window earlier in my career where we were on a adventure race team sponsored for about 5 years, really before the war got a little bit busy. And during that time, we kind of we collected sport hobbies, I guess you should say. It's really when I got into a lot of biking, I got into a lot of mountaineering, started to do a lot of distance stuff. We were, it's dating us, but back in the day of Eco Challenge, well, we raced Eco Challenge. So raced in Fiji, raced in Alaska, and these are multi-day competitive endurance events going across multiple sports, relatively without predictability, and we love to do that, and it fired me up, I think, and gave me a skill set that has never left me, and I've just gotten deeper and deeper as time has gone by.
I always admired your dedication and ability to do that. I was never driven or passionate about those things, but I still had to get up and exercise in the morning. And I remember we were stationed together out at Fort Leavenworth, and I'd be rolling out of bed about 6:30 and the sun's starting to come up, and I'm like, yeah, it's kind of chilly out. I guess I'm going to go for a jog. And here you and your wife are coming back from about 20 miles that you'd already done before I'd even gotten out of bed.
Yeah, those were the Boston Marathon and the Ironman days. So yeah, we had a lot of hours on the trail together.
Yeah,
Good
so
marriage
that
counseling, by the way.
right, just go spend 25, 30 hours a week, just roll it out there. Yeah, I'm sure it is. My wife, by the way, would not be on board with that. But so now you not only fix bikes, but you fix bikers, right? You're helping people through a performance coaching. So tell me about that.
Sure. Well, the fixing of bikes is almost a gateway drug because you get them in the door, and then you
Yeah.
start talking about how they're training. And so, yeah, so strength to endure performance coaching. What we do, there's a lot in that name. Actually, I think it's probably a good start point. I truly believe that the term when you look at strength to endure is about a perspective. It's about a lifestyle. Uh, we all are training for something. It's easy to have a clear culminating goal of, say, I'm going to run a race, run a marathon, or do something like that. But hey, what are we really training for? To me, we're training for life. We are training for the longevity of the quality of life that you maintain. We need the strength to endure everything that the world is going to throw at us. And life catches up. and it gets harder and harder as you get older and older. And if you don't start or understand the science behind it, and you're not passionate about that training, then it will catch up. And so, what we do for our performance coaching, we've had experience across multiple different sports throughout our careers. Both, I say we because both my wife and I are running that business together. We coach together, and so we are training. We're training marathoners. We're training ultra runners. We're training Ironman athletes. We're also training adaptive athletes. We're training, hand cyclists, and a large number of folks who I have to re-educate them because they say they're not athletes, but to me, an athlete is somebody who is decided on and is pursuing a solid goal. We train people on performance breath work, one of the most fundamental things that drives our body. And it, in a lot of ways, fills my cup to be able to pass on some hard-earned experience, hard-earned lessons to help people navigate, the own limitations that they've created in their mind in order to achieve their own goals.
Okay, let me pull on that thread about breath work real quick because I coach as a leadership coach. One of the things that we talk about is how do you generate energy and how do you regulate your own body for wellness? And breath work is an important part of that. And some people look at me like I'm crazy. They're like, you want me to learn? I've been breathing my whole life. What are you talking about? So what do you say? What do you say? Hey, but I'm going to have to talk to you about how you breathe.
Absolutely. Oh, I could go on for days and days about breath work, but I'll start here. A lot of people will immediately refer to the term, oh, breath work, and they'll think of some yogic breath, or they'll, couple body, or they'll think of some box breathing. And that's great. But then you say, okay, well, show me a deep breath. And then what you see, it's fascinating. What you see is and they bring this big up vertical breath, and it's completely structurally wrong. There is no diaphragmatic expansion. There is no circumferential expansion throughout the core. They're activating the wrong way. They're breathing the wrong way. They're limiting their oxygen intake. It's amazing because people don't even realize it because we've actually been socially acculturated to it since as young as 5 years old. Age 5, you start sitting in a desk. You start feeling these pressures from society. You get a little bit older. You start getting fat shaming, so you're sucking in your belly. You learn all these bad habits, and then they say, "Oh, I'm going to do breath work," and they don't even know how to do a proper structural breath. So I stumbled into breath work after I read a book by Dr. Belisa Vranich called "Breathing for Warriors," which is a great book, particularly because it teaches proper structural breathing, and then it teaches how to apply those the different types of breath patterns to the specific activity that you're doing. Well, at the time, I was working with a lot of adaptive athletes, combat wounded in particular, and I had realized that when we're doing things like team sports, wheelchair sports, and you have an athlete who's kicking across the court and they are hip hinged and compressing their diaphragm and they have no access to it. I'm like, so this is great. We're doing all this diaphragmatic breath training, but how does it apply to somebody with a spinal cord injury who doesn't have access to it? So I cold called Belisa and said, hey, I love your stuff, but how do you do it for this person? And it launched into a really great relationship. And I'm certified with her. I'm also working through a couple other different course certifications, and so now I teach. I teach breath work to all of my athletes. When I bring a new athlete in, we perform a movement analysis, and as part of that movement analysis, I begin it with a breath analysis. I do what's called a breathing IQ. I assess whether or not they're expanding properly in the right space, vertical, horizontal, a whole bunch of different things I won't dive into. And almost, I would say over 90% of the people who come in are not properly breathing. I'll end this piece with 3 separate sections, though, because when you think about the breath, I just talked about what is called the biomechanical portion of your breathing, all right, breathing proper structurally, but biochemical also has to do with how well you are maintaining or adapting to carbon dioxide in your bloodstream, how efficient you are in incorporating oxygen, whether or not you are maximizing the use of nitric oxide that is generated as you breathe. And then the psychosocial aspect of it, which translates to how you pattern your breathing to control your autonomic nervous system. We are blessed as human beings because we are the only species that can consciously and unconsciously breathe. And our conscious ability to breathe means we can regulate our pattern, whether we want to be in a state of fight or flight or rest or digest. Whether you want to be calm before you come in and chat with some intimidating guy like you, or want to hit the race line already charged up and excited and ready to hit the ground hard, we can change that level of arousal simply through breath.
So that's so incredibly important from a leadership standpoint. And when I talk to leaders about when they're about to go into a tough situation, whether it's going into a board meeting or they're leading their team through a crisis, like, dude, you got to be calm. How can I be calm at a time like this? I'm like, well, you have to be. And one of the things that you can do is regulate your breath because you can't regulate your pulse. You don't have control of your pulse, but what you can do is control those things. That's the one thing that you can control that bridges it. You can bring your heart rate down through controlling your breathing, and then you could
Absolutely.
walk into that room calmly.
Yep.
Oh, by the way, if you want to generate energy before you walk out on stage to give a big speech, you can do the same thing through your breath. Those are very simple examples of how leaders can use breath work to prepare for certain situations. And when I mentioned to them, look, yeah, the box breathing is a great idea. It's a great tool. If it's good enough for special operators to do before they crash through a door, it's probably good enough for you before you walk into the boardroom.
Yep.
But to listen to you talk about the science behind it takes away that look. We're not talking about a yoga guru here who just says, like let's breathe into your spine. There is physiology behind the
Absolutely.
breath work that makes it so incredibly important and so incredibly effective for you being in control of you.
Yep.
All
Very
right, so
true.
I love that you're doing that. But now you mentioned in there that you work with adaptive athletes, and you at one point, I don't know if you still consider yourself an adaptive athlete, but you had a major setback. You were a world class athlete, and then you're doing the country's bidding. Something happened there. I had some struggles after that. Talk us about that.
Yeah, well, I think the moral of the story I'll lead with is don't play catch with an IED.
Yeah, good
So yeah,
advice out there, boys and girls.
so yeah, I was severely wounded in Iraq. I was serving with 4th Brigade of the 25th ID. Task Force Warrior MIT 820. I got to call them out because they are an incredible group of men who were doing the nation's mission. So I was pretty severely wounded in a roadside bomb in 2007. All of us were. We all survived, but literally, it took 5 of us to recreate a full human being based upon the impact to our bodies. Not to be overly graphic, but it was tough. We all went through a significant amount of recovery. Um, I A large portion of that bomb did a significant amount of damage to my arm, as well as shrapneling along the side, traumatic brain injury, etc. It took 13 surgeries to restructure my arm. They took nerves out of my leg, put them into my arm, and it took 4 years for that nerve to essentially uh, grow enough to gain contact and gain control of my arm. I don't have full use of it. So yeah, I'm very much still an adaptive athlete in my opinion. There are varying levels. I've adapted. I was very thankful about the unbelievable ability of the doctors that I had to do something that at the time was not normal, to literally transplant 5 inches of nerve and have it succeed. It's pretty amazing. But I'm also thankful of the men and women of the military that tolerated me for another 15 years of service after that. I had jump masters in the 20th Engineer Brigade that were willing to change the primary door as we exited the aircraft because I couldn't hold on to a static line. And there was an interesting challenge. In fact, I went through jump master school pretty much being able to do it with one arm. Um,
Wow.
so
Well, a
yeah,
lot of people don't make it through jump master school with two arms.
yeah. Well, it made life interesting, but there's so many lessons within that. And the greatest one that I took away is the fight's never over. You've as long as you keep your eyes on that horizon, you keep taking a step, you take another step. The end state may not be what you envisioned when you started, but you're going to get there. You're going to get somewhere along that path. I had a hard time during my recovery because, as you said, I was personally and professionally at a pretty high level, I felt. And, being wounded like that was humbling. We are all very mortal. We are all very easily replaceable. But I had a realization during that time frame that I had an incredible family. My wife is unbelievable. She stood by me bedside for months during that recovery process. Um, I had everything I needed to keep going, and I shouldn't have felt as depressed and miserable as I was, because there was a future still ahead of me. But what struck me in that thought process was there were a lot of men and women out there who did not have as much as I had, who had undergone far more severe injuries at the time, and I wanted to somehow join with them in that journey of recovery. So my we were living in Alaska at the time, when I was going through my recovery, and even before that deployment, my wife had told me that, hey, we had always planned we were going to climb Denali, and that's the highest point in North America. For those of you who don't know it, 20,320 feet. And after my injury, she told me one day, she said, hey, I'm climbing Denali. And she said it matter of factly, flat. Not a question, not an offer, not a suggestion, none of that. It was, I'm climbing, and I'm here, one arm Mark, thinking, oh man, that was an ultimatum. That was either wallow in your despair or get your ass out of bed and start training with me, because we've got a mountain to climb. And when I
Wow.
went through that thought process, I realized, I'm like, yeah, I got to get back in the game, or I'm going to give up everything I have with her, the role model I'm trying to be for my kids. And then I'm like, okay, but if I'm feeling this way, I'm 34, I'm a major in the army, I've got degrees, I've got all this. Well, what about the 18-year-old who lost his leg? Et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I said, okay, we'll do it, but we're going to do it different. We're going to find guys or gals that need it, like I do. Not want it, but need it. They've got a hole in their soul. They're trying to rediscover their identity, their new normal. So we started cold calling, and we recruited several other, three other wounded soldiers to join us. Raises money, brought them up to Alaska, did a 12-day training program, sent them back home for a year. We trained together virtually before it was really a thing. And end of that year, brought them back up to Alaska, and we climbed Denali. And it was an incredible experience, but it's the experience that has continued to guide my perspective on, frankly, every obstacle that I face and that I see others and how they're confronting it.
That's an incredible story, Mark. We were talking earlier about a mutual friend who described the small obstacles that stop so many people. And he described it as a Jersey barrier that people can't figure out how to get around or over. And here you are with a 20,000-foot mountain that's in front of you. It's no Jersey barrier, but you know, realizing that the connection between that endeavor, whether or not you get to peak it, was probably not the relevant point. It was whether or not you were willing to get out of bed and go prepare for that. And it was that journey. And oh, by the way, I'm going to bring other people with me, because as long as I've known you, you've been a leader. You've been somebody that brings other people along and inspires other people. And now you're focused on that part of the community that needs it probably more than anybody.
It's absolutely about the journey. There's a great saying. I forget who to attribute it to, but it goes, summits are optional, but descents are mandatory. Let's let that sink in a little
That's
bit.
right.
You don't have to summit. But the question that I encourage everyone to really ask is, what is your mountain? What are you training for? What is your goal? If you don't have one, you're all over the map. You're training without purpose. You're training without specificity. You're not focused. You're not passionate. You're not driven. Find your mountain. And you made the comment about bringing people with me. Well, that could even be a little bit selfish, because when you surround yourself with a tribe, you are committed to them. There's no going back. You don't want to fail them. You want to do everything you can to enable their success. So you got to be present. So if you're doing it solo, it's easy to quit. So find your mountain, tell everyone you're climbing it so you're held accountable, and find some
That's
people there to be left and right of you to kick you in the butt when you start slagging, and to motivate you simply by wanting to show up for them.
that so incredibly important advice for leaders everywhere, regardless of whether or not you think you're facing a significant challenge like a huge mountain, or if it's just I've got this big presentation. It's mounting the courage, going and doing the work to be prepared for that moment. And I love the idea of like, what's your mountain?
Yep.
When you're training without a goal, it's just a grind.
I'd offer also that the mountain is intimidating, which it should be. That long term goal should be something that you're scared enough to train for. There's a lot. I like to refer to it as replacing fear with fact. Most of the time, when we're scared to do something, it's usually because we've never done it before. We don't experience it. We don't have context. From a coach perspective, I'll say, hey, if you've never run a marathon, you're terrified and you don't think you can do it. But after you've run it, then you realize, okay, I don't really need to be scared unless I absolutely didn't train for it. But but you've replaced fear with fact. But along the journey and along that very intimidating path to try and get to a summit, the other aspect is there's a whole bunch of smaller obstacles, Jersey barriers, smaller T walls.
Yeah.
How are you breaching those? How are you bypassing those? And I'll give you an example. I mean, climbing the mountain was an incredible experience for on so many levels. But some of the first challenges, Matt Nyman, uh, who I do have to comment on that. Matt passed in a climbing accident just a few years back, and we miss him. He's an incredible man. Um, but Matt Nyman was one of our climbers on Operation Denali, and during that climb, he was a leg amputee. He lost his leg in a helicopter accident, and actually in a raid in Baghdad. And we were immediately faced with the challenge of how do you attach a snowshoe to his prosthetic, or how is it that we effectively use his crampons, or attach the crampons so that he has enough rigidity in order to maintain the purchase. Other challenges, when he's descending, of how do we reduce the amount of suction that was occurring on his socket that was wearing down the skin because we're carrying extra load. So we had a whole bunch of smaller obstacles to try and negotiate. John Cunnahome, another one of our climbers, Marine captain who lost his arm in Haditha, he was using he had a hook for his prosthetic primarily as we climbed. So we had to relearn how to tie and pass knots because you've got to pass carabiners. Not an easy process to do when you're in negative 20 degrees. Hard enough with two hands. Um, and then we had one of the most challenging obstacles of what do you do when you're cooking in the kitchen, on the side of a mountain, and you drop something into the bottom of a pot of boiling water. You call John with his prosthetic. But the point being is you have a lot of small obstacles that you just have to look at, piece by piece, and that gets you further along the path.
So I love the term adaptive athletes. Right? We've heard of called a lot of different things over the years, but that's the idea of adaptation is exactly in line with the small little obstacles. No matter what you're trying to achieve, you may have the huge mountain out there as your obstacle that you're trying to overcome, but the little things along the way. So many people give up.
Mm-hmm.
But what a great example of adaptation. In this case, it was very physical, but there's a lot of mental adaptation that has to go on too when you find all of these different obstacles and maybe things aren't going exactly the way you thought they
Sure.
would.
Yeah. Well, you know, um, one, adaptations go both directions. There's good ones and there's bad ones,
Mm.
and we are all in one way or another an adaptive athlete. Um, Definitely not downplaying the severity of those who are overcoming major injuries, but the reality is all of us consistently adapt. We adapt to minor injuries. We adapt to the consequences of old age. We adapt to stress. And how do you adapt to stress? Do you go home and have a rum coke every night, Or do you, I don't know, go home and walk the dog? Those are adaptations. And if you're not looking at the perspective, or at least you don't have the recognition of how life is changing your own behavior subconsciously, then you're no longer in the driver's seat. It's truly important to recognize when certain stressors, physical or mental, are changing behaviors, are changing decision processes, and reassert control over that. I am, especially as I've gotten to be an older athlete, and the way that you train changes. I've become more and more focused on what holistic wellness or holistic training means. It used to be in when we were younger, it was no worries, go out, run hard, do whatever. We can just put our head down and charge through the wall. But I'm recognizing now that you have to be comprehensive in every different commodity that you apply to adapt and address a situation. So we already talked about breath work, but there's all other types of recovery modalities. How are are you doing self-myofascial work, foam rolling or stretching? How are you doing? I'm a big advocate when it comes to contrast baths or cold bath, hot tub, cold bath, hot tub. So much so, we got one in our gym. We use it with our athletes. It's incredible the effect it has, not just physically, but also in terms of mental resilience. We have access to so many different pieces of equipment and knowledge these days, that if we are singularly focused on, how much weight you're lifting or how many miles you're running, that you lose broader perspective of how your body is responding, and you start failing to address the issues that are the ones that are going to end your career early, no matter what, whether that's a military career, a fitness career, or a corporate leader, succumbing to the stress of the job.
Well, that's absolutely true, and one of the things that we talk about at Five Eagles is wellness as a leader, and a lot of times we get really busy. All of us do. We get really busy. Our calendars get filled up, and we start to sacrifice things. And usually, the first thing that goes is our diet. We were like, "Oh, I don't have time to go shopping for good food, so I'm just going to run through the drive-through." Or I don't have time to have breakfast, so I'll just grab something extra at lunch or on the way. So our diet goes, and another thing that goes is our sleep. Like we don't. I'll just get up earlier in the morning, or I'll stay up later and get this work done because it's due tomorrow.
Yep.
Uh, we'll give up our workouts because, well, I could go to the gym or I could get 20 more emails done and I'll be ready for my day. And you do it once and it's like, okay, that's not really going to have an effect. But over time, those sacrifices that you're making on self care, on your wellness, is going to have an impact on your decision making. It's going to have an impact on your ability to deliver, to show up with the energy you need to be a leader in your organization. And it is one of the things I think that people are surprised when they go through one of my programs is that we spend quite a bit of time talking about how do you take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And I always tell them the story of my operations sergeant in Bosnia taking the handset away from me on the VRC 46 radio that I had and saying, "Sir, you can't use this again until you get 5 hours of sleep," because apparently I was mouthing off to some field grade officer because I hadn't slept in 2 days.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Hey, you can't take care of us if you don't take care of you."
Absolutely.
And of course, I was staying up late for all the right reasons.
So I'll give you a fitness coach perspective, and what I would call those is they're all junk miles. All right. So, if you're training for something, if you're out there and you're in the gym or you're running miles, you need to do it for a reason. You need to do it for a purpose. If you don't have one, then they're junk miles. You're putting more volume, more load on your body that is going to lead to an overtraining injury. How is that any different for a leader?
Right.
So if your junk miles are now translating to junk hours because you're working, late at night and you're creating a crap product that you're going to have to reproduce the next day, or you're making decisions that are going to set back the team instead of advance them, how effective is that? So don't do junk miles. You know, if you just back it off and you look at how, you create those micro sessions, and this applies to diet too. Every one of those minute decisions there's always an easier option there, or there's always a better option. It's like, all right, well, don't get the soda, drink some water. Okay, that simple, right? Or how is it that I'm going to have a workout because I don't care who you are. Give me 10 minutes and I'll smoke you. Uh, that's all you need. But people somehow create like this massive load around what it takes to be fit or to elevate your heart rate for a little while, or why not have a walking meeting or something to that effect where you can then um, be that much more productive instead of putting in junk miles.
I love that. That's a great analogy. And I know I put in plenty of junk miles over the years where I'm just out there plodding along and you're not motivated. But if you have an event that you're going to, training for a marathon or a triathlon or something like that, those miles matter to you in a way that's very, very different from going out and doing maintenance.
Yep.
I love
Yep.
that. And to plan your hours with that kind of mindset. What am I doing? How am I being deliberate and intentional with my time for the greater good of myself and my organization?
Yep. What's the ROI?
What's the ROI on skipping the workout versus the ROI of doing these 10 emails? Oh, by the way, if you haven't figured out that I'm a big fan of delegating, outsourcing, and automating. So, there's somebody named Elizabeth out there that makes sure that I stay straight on my calendar because I have outsourced that because I'm not good at it. But she helps me maximize my productivity because she helps me be very intentional about what I do. And I know that I needed help with that, which is why I have somebody doing that. And I think that's another piece that leaders often shy away from is asking for the help that they need. There's a big difference about like, okay, I want to go run a marathon. I'm going to just download a marathon training program off the internet.
You
I'm
know,
pretty sure that's going to come out very different.
I love that. Well, I mean, I love that. Because I had an athlete this last week. A little hesitant about bringing on a coach, looking for a plan, and she says, "Hey, so I want to work with you, but we're only do it for X amount of time, and what about this plan up until then?" And I look at the plan, I'm like, "Well, sure, that's great, but you've got no specificity on the pace that you're going to train to. You have no ability to look at how much training load you're doing out on these miles. You've got nobody looking at you for accountability. Um, so you can do all that, but you're going to end up doing nothing more than time on your feet because all that plan is telling you is you need to be doing the work. So, you're at work 9 to 5, but within those hours, what specificity are you using for training? And if you don't also use the people with the knowledge to do the tasks, as proficiently as possible, i.e., your delegation, then you're becoming more inefficient in your training. It's always, there's a cost benefit in how much you can or are willing to invest into something, but there are things that only you can do. There are things that only you should do.
That's
And
right.
there are a whole bunch of other things that other people, hey, that's their lane, and the cumulative product is going to be, have greater specificity and that much more successful in the long run, right? So, as a coach, that's kind of what you bring to the table. Is now you have somebody who's from a neutral perspective looking at the entire output for the athlete. In my case. As opposed to them just grabbing anything off the internet, and that is our challenge with AI these days because people type in, "Oh, give me a plan." That's great. That's great. But, you realize that you haven't really done an effective movement analysis and you have this issue with your hip and your knee, and go ahead and do those hours without any base training and you'll be injured for the rest of the year. So,
Yeah, it's funny because there's a lot of AI coaching that is now coming out, even in the leadership space, and they're like,
oh, yeah.
okay, there's an AI life coach, there's an AI leadership coach, and when I talk to the some of the developers of those things, they're like, well, we're still missing something, and it's that human connection. And I'm like, well, there's things that I can do with a client that the AI is not going to do because I can look them in the eye and I can hold silence. So there's a thing, right? When you ask a really hard question and they don't want to answer it, and then you're just staring at them, there's a different thing about that moment, because eventually they're going to come around and they're going to have to deal with what you asked them. So there's this human touch about how deliberate you are at helping people dig deep, whether it's about their physical endeavors or their leadership endeavors. Those are, I think, very many parallels to it. And you mentioned something earlier, I think that was very interesting, and it had to do with your martial arts training. And currently, you're not just training but teaching.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I've I've been in the martial arts all my life. Really, I cannot be more thankful that my parents got me involved at a young age, because it's kind of given me has given me a skill set that has served me well throughout my life, not just physically but also mentally. So yeah, when I left service, I was finally to get able to get back into service. I trained at a school out here in Colorado, Colorado Academy of Martial Arts. We trained in a style known as Seizan-ryu Kempo Jiu-Jitsu, which is a combination of multiple styles, which I particularly enjoy, having trained across multiple styles throughout my lifetime, and having black belts in several. I was really drawn to the way that our style critically problem solves. And it has a strong basis across multiple arts, as I stated, but there's a strong Filipino art to it, and there's a strong Kempo art of the open hand that goes into it. But we train both with, we train early on with weapons. We train with a stick, we train with a knife, and we train open hand. But the movement patterns are the same no matter how you're delivering. So that is part of the reason why we do train with sticks early, because once you are able to execute basically a block check strike pattern with a stick, the translation to doing it open hand is far more effective and far more efficient. So by doing that, you actually learn how to kind of reduce the decision space. There's a there's an old Eastern saying that no one have 10,000, and you think about the number of techniques that you can apply if you have mastered just one, and that is truly valuable in a martial context. That if I've got this block check strike down, no matter what's in my hands, now all I have to do is change the angle or change it and adjust it. So the metaphor truly applies to everything. You get your basics down, you get your foundation down, then you just adjust to the environment.
And to me, that's a great metaphor for leadership. And it's about having the basic fundamentals mastered to such a degree that the environment and conditions don't matter. And of course, you will make small adaptations. Look, if you're fighting on a staircase or in an alleyway, that's very, very different than if you're fighting in a dojo. But the fundamentals are still there. You still have to move right. You still have to breathe right. You
Yep.
still have to protect yourself the way that you've been trained to. As a leader, you've got some fundamentals about how you treat people, how you interact with the people that you are leading or you're influencing, and the conditions don't matter as much as those basics.
Absolutely. I
So
think, yeah,
our
foundation.
programs all are about like learn the basics. And oh, by the way, I love that idea that you have of like let's reduce the decision space through simplification.
Yeah.
If
And
I
get
don't
the
have to
reps.
make a if I don't have to make a bunch of complicated uh, process decisions, and I can just make an overarching decision and very quickly, my life becomes much simpler.
Yeah. Yep. That's what it's all about, simplicity. But you also have to have the repetitions. You got to put in the work, and you got to do it enough so that it becomes intuitive. If you have to think about it, you're not there yet. And you know, I guess that's a great thing. If if you have to make a decision about whether or not it's the right thing to say to a person, it's probably the wrong decision.
It's
you
probably
know.
pretty easy, right? Yeah, you know, the deliberate decision making process that many of us go through for a lot of things is exhausting, right? Our brain is one of those organs that takes up a lot of energy, and if we can put things in the subconscious or the unconscious
Yeah.
that will make that decision for you because you've set it up that way.
you were a
establish those
planner,
goals.
right? You were a planner for quite a while too,
I
right?
was a planner
You
for
had some
quite a
days
while.
out there. I used to always, and I've actually I've shared the analogy too. You think about how we had to plan, especially the military decision making process. We plan to exquisite detail, uh, but people often miss the point. It's not about writing the plan. The plan never goes as executed. It never survives first contact, as the cliche goes. Um, but the process of writing the plan is the process of truly understanding the problem that you face and all of the variables that may influence the way it's going to fall, in the outcome. And having that experience of going through and applying the base concept against all the variables, I think that's applicable to no matter what you do. It's definitely in the martial arts. When you look at the martial arts, it's like, okay, when people, you have an offense, you have a defense, you have an attack in a certain direction, right? But there are ultimate different variations. So how do I now have to adjust it? If I understand whether this attack is coming from the outside, from the inside, overhead, or wherever, then I just have to adjust the pattern that I respond to it in. It's the same thing in any type of complex decision. If I understand what's going to have the greatest consequence, then I move accordingly, and adjust.
Yeah, there are so many metaphors for that, for the leadership realm, and
Good thing
yeah,
Bruce Lee's not on here. He'd be giving us something about water.
oh, yeah, absolutely. Be water, my friend. I think in the planning world, I think you're absolutely right. And Eisenhower probably said it best when he said, "Plans are useless, but planning is indispensable."
Absolutely.
And it was absolutely right. It was about truly understanding the physics of the problem, the nature of the problem, and the context of the problem, so that when your plan went to shit, you really have the ability to adapt because you understand what's happening. And I think that applies to not just making plans for the military, but making plans for your business or making plans for a difficult conversation that you're going to have with somebody within your business, within a leadership realm, when you're holding people accountable. If you have a plan for that conversation and you're ready for it, it's very different than doing a movement to contact, as we would call it, where you're just out there looking for the fight and hope that you're going to have the upper hand when it happens.
Yep. As a small business owner, in the process of building out and scaling businesses, absolutely true. I have all kinds of great vision boards, and I'm like, let's adjust this. Let's do that. No, this is a better idea. Always changing, always moving. But that also
Yeah,
keeps it spicy, keeps it fun.
it keeps it spicy. I had just taped a podcast with a founder multiple times of startups, and some of the advice that he has for founders. It's really about making sure that you stay focused on what problem are you trying to solve.
Yeah.
And sometimes we get all of these vision boards or we get all of these great ideas and we start to bolt things onto our company because we want to solve a lot of problems. And then it becomes like the Bradley or the Ace, where you start, it's missing the fundamental reason it was designed in the first place because every constituency put a piece on it, and now you've got a Frankenstein's monster that doesn't perform the way you want it to.
So I I've I've noticed that in the way that I approach performance coaching. You notice that I've not been specific about what sport I coach.
Right.
I coach athletes. I don't care what your sport is. I will modify accordingly. There are folks that are technical experts that will get at the specificity of that sport. But when I look at all of the attributes that are necessary, which are in a lot of ways are universal, it's goal setting, it's accountability, it's self discipline, it's time management. These are core attributes that without which you will fail, no matter your sport. The biomechanics and understanding what goes into the sport that you perform are relatively straightforward. And no matter what, you've got to have the strength and conditioning. You've got to have the mobility piece and all of these things in order to play that sport successfully and do it long. So sometimes I've thought, I'm like, well, maybe we should just do running. Maybe we should just do triathlon, and focus at that, what is it you do? And I consciously step myself back. I'm like, no, I will coach any sport. I coach athletes. That's my focus.
I love that, and I will tell you that I'm guessing that the biomechanics of your running gait or your your swing or whatever it is less important than the resiliency, the mental performance aspect of what you're coaching.
Absolutely. 90% mental, 10% physical, they say. Um, there are definitely some key advantages when you're at the most elite level, but what I notice, particularly with recreational, even competitive athletes, um, what I notice is that their core movement patterns are lacking. And if you haven't invested in your body performing the way it's designed, then you're never going to get to that next level. So you've got to level set, make sure things are functioning properly, and then build from there. Just getting us level set, I think the majority of us, that's a job in itself.
I think you're right, and you had the advantage of starting martial arts at a young age, which teaches that. It's fundamentally about how to control yourself and your body. And when you have those basic mechanics down correctly, it translates to everything else that you do. So, people may not see the connection between knowing how to regulate your core, for example, and running, but they are absolutely intertwined.
I'll share an interesting point that just jumped in mind with that because, as when I was 16 to 18, I was teaching kids before I went to West Point and all of that. And what I've realized being back in the dojo and teaching kids now is how different kids are these days in terms of kinesthetic awareness, proprioceptive awareness. They don't have, going back to my earlier comment, they don't have the reps as kids, and they don't have the developmental skills physically. So we're spending more time on very foundational movement patterns to get just stepping and moving and running and rolling properly, teaching that. And honestly, I think that that's one of the most valuable things that I took away from training at a young age is I don't think if I fall, my body just knows how to do it. But kids these days, and unless you can tell the difference between when a parent has had their kids involved from a very early age or suddenly realized it and put them into this, put them into the dojo. They're like night and day in terms of their physical abilities. And I am such an advocate for investing at an extreme early age in getting our children active, having them learn their body and develop these skills because it gets locked in early, it stays forever.
I 100% agree. And having been a martial arts on and off in my life, that I found one of the most valuable things is exactly what you said is how to fall. And then as a youth soccer coach, part of our warm ups was falling drills. And parents were like, "Why are you doing that?" I'm like, "Because they're going to fall down a lot, and I would rather them not get injured doing so." And they thought it was crazy. I'm like, "But you parents over in the sidelines probably ought to be doing these same drills and figuring out how to fall, because that frankly, I you and I are not spring chickens anymore, but we're still very active." And it's because we've remained so. And I know that there's a lot of people our age that are not. They're incapable of being as active as we are for the moment. But if they dedicate themselves, they can change that.
That's why the most important med that you can take is exactly that, med, move every day.
Move every day. I love it. I love it. Well, Mark, man, I can't thank you enough for spending time with me and telling your story. And I've got some takeaways that I'm never going to forget. The fight's never over is a great quote. What's your mountain? That's going to be used again and again for me. And along the way, there's other obstacles. It's not just the mountain, but how are you going to overcome those? Because after all, we are all, in one way or another, an adaptive athlete.
This is true. So no more junk miles, and when you get your way back out to Denver, you can accompany me to the dojo.
I would love that. Yeah, I got my kid out there now, and maybe I ought to send him over to your dojo as well. I don't know if
He's
he's
welcome.
man. So, Mark, tell me what's next for you. How's all of this going to continue to blossom over the next couple of years?
Well, my wife successfully retired from her career this past month here. Actually, this is her first full week, not with a full time job. So
Wow.
we are at the full start of getting strength to endure, growing and expanding to touch as many people as possible. So we're continuing to scale what we're doing in that space, and we're gonna actually combine a lot of the things that you just heard here today. We are hoping to expand out and start doing some breathwork clinics. We're going to do some trail safe training, teach people how to be situationally aware and safe when they're training or when they're out running on the trails or running on the streets, being aware of their surroundings and if they have to, what decisions to make if they are confronted by an attacker. Because I think all of it is one package, and we've got all those skill sets. So we're going to put them all together and just help people get to where they want to be.
I absolutely love it. And life, nature does not distinguish between the different kinds of workouts that you want to do. It is going to challenge you in every way, and it doesn't matter if it's out on a trail or in a boardroom. You will be challenged, and how you prepared for that is going to determine the outcomes. So, man, I love what you do, and please let me know how I can be of any help with your endeavors.
Absolutely, Bob. Really enjoy it. Thanks for having me on.